Hello, and welcome to our daily work remote strategies. We're delighted to see you. Today, we have the mini webinar of 4 steps to prepare for resilience. You probably hadn't thought about that before, not just about resilience, but the 4 steps to prepare for resilience. So that's what we're doing today, and we're doing it with Kathryn Britton. Kathryn is one of the main people at Silicon Valley Change at us as a company, and she is also a longtime coach and a longtime friend, and I'm delighted to have her here with us. Hi, Kathryn.
I am so happy to be here. So thank you for inviting me, Senya.
Really fun. And today we're doing it as questions. We're doing it as a little bit of a Q&A. So my first question to you, Kathryn, will be, can you tell us a little bit about the preparing part? Because we're talking about 4 steps for preparing. Could you tell us a little bit about the preparing part?
Well, Senya, this came back to my mind recently because I was thinking about a time back in 2008 when there was also a lot of uncertainty about jobs. You know, there was a lot of economic uncertainty, and there started to be a lot of fear among people, even in the tech world, that they would lose their jobs. And one of the questions I got asked was, how do you prepare yourself in this period of waiting? How do you prepare yourself just in case something as dire as losing your job happens? And so I sat down and did some thinking about it, and then I wrote an article for the Anita Borg Association that they published for a while that was basically advice to women in technology who were worried about whether or not their jobs might just dry up. I've been through several ups and downs like this. I've been through periods of time when we could not find people to hire because all of the startups were completely sucking them out of the ecosystem, and then times when they all came flooding back, because the startups were failing, et cetera. So I've seen many ups and downs. So these are my thoughts, my own particular thoughts about how to make sure that if something does happen, you are already ready for it. So it's not a wait until you get laid off or a wait until something happens kind of thing. It's a, what can you do now so that you're ready when the time comes?
And Kathryn, you're calling these 4 steps to prepare for resilience. What if we're already in a situation in which we need resilience? Let's say we need resilience now. Why don't we start by saying, can you tell us what are the 4 steps at a high level, and then we'll drill down into them?
Okay, terrific. The first step is to learn how to calm yourself down. And I call this the first step, and it really is the first step because I've tried to do the other steps without doing this one first, and you just dig yourself deeper into a hole. So learning how to calm yourself down. The second step is to collect together what I'm going to call a positivity portfolio, but it's that set of things that raise your spirits. So things that music you love to listen to, etc. Books that you like to read, stories you like to tell. Number 3 is to work on how you frame whatever it is that's going on about you. There are interpretations that are good for you and interpretations that are not so good for you. And if you have any interpretive latitude, right, if you have any wiggle room for how you interpret a particular event, to work on choosing the interpretations that really do serve you. There's a lot behind that. We could spend hours talking about the various ways. In fact, I know that people do. There are resilience training programs where that's essentially what they're teaching people. And then the final one is to take inventory of what are your assets. These can be your strengths, they can be your connections, they can be your financial resources, they can be all kinds of assets, but to take inventory so you know what you have to work with. So these are all things that you don't have to wait until disaster strikes in order to access them. You can start working on, what are my techniques, what really works for me in terms of calming down, what really makes me feel better, what kinds of interpretation skills can I build, and then finally, what kind of assets, to be aware of the assets that you have that can help you face whatever it is that's happening to you. So that's the high level. Shall I get started and just dig down into them?
Yes, so just to understand, it's calming yourself.
Right.
Then it's positive emotion can I bring in?
Right.
How do I interpret my thoughts? And
Yes.
then resources. How do I resource myself?
The inventory is my favorite word for it.
Inventory. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Maybe
Yes.
maybe
Please go
that's
ahead.
because I'm a, you know, had many years ago training as a librarian. So I think in terms of thinking about the inventory of books that you have in your house or whatever. So
Nice.
anyway,
So
okay.
then on the first one, on calming yourself, what are some ways that work, and especially even have worked for you? Like you said, you really need to do that step before you go on to the other three.
Well, I wanted to start by saying that it really is important to do that first. Because if you are all aroused, you know, fight or flight, you're in a state of high fear, you're in a state of high anger, you're, as Brian said recently on his discussion of breathing, you lose the connection to the front part of your brain where you can do all that analytical thinking. And all the rest of these involve analytical thinking. So to be able to say, and my suggestion is that people experiment around and find what works best for them. Some suggestions are breathing techniques. I find that if I breathe at a rate of 6 breaths per minute, and I believe that that is actually the rate of Tibetan chants. Tibetan chants will cause people to breathe. If I breathe at 6 breaths per minute, that calms me down physically. So that approach works for me.
So may I ask you, 6 breaths per minute? That means each breath takes 10 seconds. That's the inhale and the exhale takes 10 seconds. Okay,
Right.
thank you.
Yeah, a very regular rate. I actually had an app one time that would have a little bar that would go up and then would go down. And so I could actually watch it and time myself. Now I just have a feeling for how to do it from having practiced enough. Brian Brannigan, in his recent talk about breathing, had, you know, the coherence, you know, the coherence through breathing technique. That's definitely something else to try, the heart coherence. So, but the point is, what works for me may not be exactly what works for you. So, you know, look around, see what kinds of things people suggest in terms of breathing or meditation or distraction or whatever it is that works, and experiment until you know what it is so that you can draw on it quickly when you need to. So if you start finding yourself getting very anxious or very angry or very upset, that you have something that you can say, this is something I can do right now to calm myself down.
So it sounds like you're saying the goal of the first step is to get to a place where you are in that breathing about 6 breaths per minute, whatever method you use, like yoga or stretching or meditation or breathing, to get there. Is that accurate?
Well, my view of the goal is that you know what works for you. So you have, you know, in your toolbox, so to speak, you have a technique to calm yourself down. And breathing is one suggestion, yoga is one suggestion. There are a number of things people could try, but to know what works for you in particular so that you're ready in case you need it.
So this could even be going for a walk, or it could be lying down, almost like taking out. So really, it could be a wide range of things.
It could be a wide range of things, right?
Very helpful.
It's just the self-awareness of what really works for you.
Okay. So then once we are at that place, we're ready for the next 3 steps.
Okay. So the next step, as I mentioned, that people sometimes call it a positive portfolio, but you know, this is another one that's very much based on you knowing you. So what works for you? So what kinds of things raise your spirits? So among other things, I have certain books that I go back to and read because they will distract me and I know they make me feel good. I have music that I'll listen to. I have things that make me laugh. I have a file of emails that I've gotten from various people over the years, appreciative emails. I will look at those. I even have the set of YouTube videos that you put together for me for my birthday last year, Senya, that, you know, is a place that I can go to raise my spirits. So what is it that works for you to raise your spirits? And just be collecting those and having them available for those moments when you need to give yourself a bit of a boost.
So then at that point, you've got your list of your things for raising your spirits.
Right.
Great. What should we do next? Step 3.
Well, the next one is to be prepared to look at different ways of interpreting whatever happens to you, and to think of it in terms of to figure out, where do I have interpretive latitude? So let's assume, for example, that I've just lost my job. Okay, so I'm sitting here, I've just lost my job. I just walked into my manager's office. I got the discussion that says, you need to leave at the end of the day, take everything you want to go with you, but you're out of here. I can view this as I have just been totally rejected. Or I can view this as, there are business reasons that, my services aren't needed right now. So I have a couple, at least two, if not a whole raft of interpretations. So if you think of it as you have multiple ways that you can interpret a particular event, any one of them could be just as true as another. So why not pick the ones that put you in a place where you're confident and where you are, and where you feel as whole as you possibly can in that moment?
I want to ask a question on behalf of the skeptics.
Okay, go right ahead.
I have often heard people say, in answer to advice like what you're saying, Kathryn, but what if it's not true? Why am I deceiving myself? That kind of thing. How would you respond to that?
Well, I think you have to be able to distinguish between what one researcher, Sandra Schneider, calls fuzzy knowledge and fuzzy meaning. Okay, so what she says is, if it's a matter of fact, then there's no point in just picking the right, like for example, excuse me, if I've been exposed to COVID-19, I can't deal with it just by saying, I don't have it. Like by saying, I pick the best interpretation, I don't have it. That's a matter of fact. I either have it or I don't have it. So we're really talking not about those things, but about areas where there's a range of interpretations possible. So,
I see. If the person says, I didn't lose my job, that's not true. That's
right.
false.
Exactly. That would be a falsehood. Right. But, and if their manager says, you lost your job because you're a total jerk, well then, that kind of narrows down the interpretations, the level of interpretation. They know in that particular case that at least their manager doesn't like the way they work. Okay. So you don't want to talk yourself out of the truth of what you've experienced. But the fact is that we tend to have these areas where there's a broad range of possible interpretations, and people often have the habit of choosing the interpretations that are really on the negative end and that really make them feel bad. And that's not necessary. So figure out how much interpretive latitude you have, and then choose something on the high end of it. Okay, so don't give yourself more interpretive latitude than you have. Right? Just figure out how much you have and then slide yourself over towards the high end.
That's very helpful. That's visual. That's very clear what you're describing. And also one of the comments we're getting right now is, I love the term interpretive latitude.
Yes. I found it to be something that some of the people that I work with find really a helpful concept, because it lets you look at the situation and say, how much latitude do I have here? What are the facts that are known, and how much is this sort of stretchy stuff where it really could mean a variety of things? So why pick an interpretation that puts you in a bad spot, or in a worse spot than you need to be in anyway?
So by this point, people have done calming themselves using whatever works for them, bringing up a positive emotion for themselves. Now they've done the interpretive latitude. So you're calling that reframing it. Is that correct?
It's, yes, choosing reframing.
Choosing the interpretation.
Right. That's a good way of putting it.
And then what should they do as the fourth step?
Well, this is once again something you can do and redo many times, which is to sit down with yourself and start making lists of the assets that you have. What are your strengths? Do you know what your strengths are? Some people do, some people don't. But what are your strengths? And there are various ways you can go about finding out. You can take strengths inventories. You can ask friends for their ideas of what your strengths are. You can just do some kind of meditation on it and collect information. What are your specific skills? Who are the people in your network? And who are the weak connections you have, the people that you know, friends of friends of friends who might be able to help you, for example, get into other job situations. So to sit down and kind of collect this information so that you know what you have to work with. And many times people find that they're surprised by how much they do have going for them. And that's the thing, is to have that in your mind so that this experience of, say, losing a job doesn't undermine you and make you feel like you have nothing left. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the trip through the 4 different approaches, or the 4 different preparations that I think people can do. And you don't have to wait till disaster strikes to do your inventory. This could be something that you do on a semi-annual basis, where you sit down and you say, here's what I have going for me. Here are my particular assets. Here are some assets that I want to develop further. Here's my connections. Here are connections that I want to build further. To be able to look at it from the point of view of keeping your mental picture of your resources up to date.
In fact, Kathryn, correct me if this is wrong. I'm having a sense that of the 4 steps, you actually can do literal written down prep for at least 3 of them that you've mentioned. So the calming mechanisms, you could make a list of what makes me happy. Is it playing music and dancing around the house?
Absolutely.
That can be a list that you can go to. The second one you mentioned, which is positive emotions, you could certainly make a list of what gets me into a good place right now.
Right.
And it might be that dancing is more that and calming is more breathing.
I think that all 4 of them are things that maybe reframing doesn't really lend itself to making lists, but it certainly lends itself to practicing. So you could watch in your life as you live it, and you could find yourself getting annoyed by something, or you could find yourself starting to get worried about something, and then you could say, okay, let me do a little game here and say, what are the range of ways of interpreting what just happened? And just maybe make a list for that particular event and say, I could look at it this way, or this way, or this way, or this way, and then practice picking the interpretation that leaves you in a better place.
I love your Kaizen approach there, that you're just saying, look, small steps, because we all have little frustrations. I mean, even a little one for people who have kids or spouses or someone that they're sheltering in place with, that even just a comment or a comment before dinner. And do you make that getting, or is the interpretive latitude, oh, this person is hangry. This person might be hangry. Let me eat with them. And then we can discuss. I love the idea of practicing here so that if something bigger happens, you're already practicing interpretive latitude.
Right. So you don't have to wait until you're in the middle of something. You can be building these skills on an ongoing basis.
So a question for you, and we have about 5 more minutes of the webinar. A question for you is, how can you help someone else through this kind of process, like a friend?
Well, the first thing I would do is I would never, let's assume we're talking here about somebody who's actually had the situation occur. Okay, so one of the things that I would keep in mind is never try to talk people out of their own grief around a particular situation. Don't just go in and say, oh, well, you're going to be better off anyway. Let's jump right into this. It is perfectly fair to grieve the loss of a job. It's perfectly fair to grieve anything that was in your life that you counted on and that is no longer there. I mean, I lost a job in 2012. I don't even remember. It's faded back there. But one of the things that I noticed is I very much missed the people. I didn't actually miss the job, but I really missed the people. And so I had a certain amount of grief that was part of the experience. And that, to let people, to be understanding of the grief and the sense of loss is important. That's a little bit why I kind of prefer thinking of this as techniques for preparing ahead of time, because I know that in the minute, I don't want to come in and start saying, oh, well, now you need to do this, 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 and this. I'd rather people have thought about it ahead of time and be sort of mentally prepared to deal with what arises. So, acknowledge the grieving, and then start saying, but today is the first day of the rest of your life. Where can you go forward from here? Are you feeling really anxious? Shall we breathe together? Let's see if that's something that would calm you down. And then, and reminding them that there's no point in trying to solve problems if you're highly aroused. This is something else that Brian brought up in his talk recently. If you're highly aroused, the analytical part of your brain just isn't working at its best. So don't try to rush into fixing things when you need to be able to calm your body and be able to bring yourself to a state where really clear thinking can happen.
So it sounds like you're saying one of the best things we can do for someone who, whether it's a small event or a big event, is actually just help them with that calming phase and tell them it's okay.
It might be. I'm not sure I tell them it was okay because they may or may not believe me.
That it's okay to get calm, not that the situation is okay, but it's okay in this way to breathe.
Exactly. Yes.
The calming things.
Right. And to say that this is sometimes just the really, it's like the very first step. It's so fundamental, that there's no point in trying to talk yourself out of things when you're in a highly aroused state.
Yeah.
So
let me ask you a question and then see if people on the call want to ask questions. If you do, feel free to start typing in your questions. My question for you, Kathryn, is if everybody on this call walks away and they do one thing, one action or one thought, what is that one thing that you most wish for people?
I guess I would start at the top and say, be prepared to calm yourself down. That is so fundamental. To have the others in your, the other approaches ready to go, but to be able to pull yourself back from the edge of high arousal, of high anger, of high grief, of high anxiety. And I know that, I wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, and the way I usually put it is I've got the worry monster with me. So I like to have techniques for dealing with the worry monster, and the breathing itself really, really does help for me.
It sounds like the worry monster might need a little dose of that wiggling your sillies out. Not that it would always work, but that worry monster makes me think of another
yes.
answer. We are open to your questions. If you have a brief question, we will answer it now. What I mean by a brief question is we'll take one question at this point. And just keep in mind what Kathryn's saying about these 4 steps, but really starting with that first step of how do you calm yourself. What else would you like to add, Kathryn? Yeah.
I was just going to say before, I do have a write-up of this. In fact, it's the same article that I wrote for the Anita Bork Foundation in 2008. And so I will provide a link. You may be able to put the link in the chat, okay?
I'm putting that link in the chat right now. So feel free to grab this. It's also going to be on our Facebook page and then on our mycoach.zone/workremote page. We'll put this link to this article as well. Really good idea because it goes into detail on all 4 steps and kind of can be a reminder for people. I will ask the last question. The last question is, what do you use, Kathryn, as a calming mechanism?
I breathe. And I try to breathe in just slightly longer, breathe out slightly longer than I breathe in. And I try to breathe at a really, really slow pace. And I actually tested this one time. Somebody had given me one of those finger feedback things that you can use for measuring your heart rate variability. And I found that I actually could, using this regular breathing, I could actually bring myself back into what was marked as the green zone on the heart rate variability from a state of being very much in the red zone. So I've gotten the visual proof that it works for me. And the nice thing is, as Brian pointed out in his recent speech, is you can be sitting in a very, very tense